3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. The central mystery isn't just about who was involved, it's about what is being actively removed from the record. We have found evidence of files being released and then deleted by the Department of Justice. We've covered the documents, the timeline, the people. But questions remain. Today, we examine what we still don't know. The unanswered mysteries, the ongoing investigations, the questions that may never be resolved. We are looking at the Pinpoint database, the 2015 Maxwell files, and the silence from the media. Let's flow right into the first piece of evidence. A digital trail that suggests the story is being edited in real time.
It is a digital trail, and you're right, it's a volatile one. To really get the gravity of what we're talking about today, you almost have to shift your whole perspective on what evidence even looks like now.
Okay.
I mean, we're not talking about a dusty old box of papers in some basement archive in the Southern District of New York.
No.
We're talking about a living, breathing digital archive. And more to the point, we're looking at the behavior of the Department of Justice with its own releases.
And that's where this Pinpoint database comes in. I want to make sure everyone listening really gets what this tool is because, Pinpoint sounds like some generic app you'd find on your phone.
It does.
But it's actually a pretty sophisticated piece of kit for investigative journalists, right?
It is, yeah. Pinpoint is a research tool developed by Google, actually. It's for journalists who need to sift through these just massive dumps of unstructured data. We're talking thousands of PDFs, emails, even handwritten notes and audio files.
Wow.
It uses things like optical character recognition and keyword matching to find connections that a human eye, it would just miss. It's too much data.
So the Courier Newsroom, they're the ones who took this on. They take this huge dump of government files, upload it to this searchable database, and then make it available.
Mm-hmm.
On the surface, that sounds like standard transparency.
Yeah.
Good journalism. But the twist, and this is where it gets really, really interesting, is what happened after they uploaded it.
Correct. The core allegation from the source material around this database is that the Justice Department, the actual source of all these files, began a process of releasing documents and multimedia, and then a short time later, deleting them.
Which just, it feels so wrong. I mean, let me just play devil's advocate for a second here.
Please.
Is it possible we're reading too much into a glitch? Government websites are notorious for being clunky, for crashing, for having broken links. Could this just be a server migration or, some IT guy accidentally hitting the wrong button?
That's always the first hypothesis you should test. I mean, in any large bureaucracy, incompetence is usually a safer bet than conspiracy.
Right. Occam's razor.
Exactly. But the thing is, the Courier Newsroom didn't just notice a 404-page not found error. They were tracking specific files that were uploaded, existed for a period of time, and were then targeted for removal.
Targeted?
Yes. When you have a pattern of specific files vanishing while the bulk of the database stays completely intact, that moves us away from server crash and squarely into the territory of content moderation.
So it's selective. That's the key here. If the whole server went down, that's an accident.
An IT problem.
But if 5 specific important-sounding files disappear, that's a decision.
Precisely. And in the world of FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and these kinds of court-ordered releases, a decision to retract a file usually falls into very specific, justifiable categories.
Like what? What would be legitimate reason?
Well, the most common one is a privacy breach. Did they accidentally leave a victim's social security number unredacted?
Okay, that makes sense.
Or did they expose a home address of a witness? If that happens, the DOJ has a legal obligation to pull the file down, scrub that specific data, and then re-upload it.
But that's not what we're seeing here, is it? We're not seeing files come down and then go back up with a new black bar over a phone number.
No.
We're seeing them vanish, just gone.
We are seeing what the source describes as retained deletions. And that's because the Courier Newsroom was acting as an archival service. They had the foresight to download and save these files before the DOJ could scrub them from the public server.
They have the receipts.
They absolutely have the receipts. And when we look at the content of these vanished files, the whole clerical error theory becomes much, much harder to sustain.
And this brings us right to the most politically charged piece of this whole puzzle.
Yeah.
One of the specific claims from the source material is that several of the items deleted by the DOJ, they connect Epstein to former President Donald Trump.
And we have to handle this data point with extreme precision. We're in such a polarized environment, and the moment you say Trump or Clinton, half the audience immediately shuts down and the other half just assumes guilt.
Of course.
So our job here is to look at the metadata of the deletion. What does the act of deleting this file tell us? The source indicates that files connecting the former president to Epstein were among those that were removed.
Okay, but let's push on that a little. Does a file connecting them automatically mean evidence of a crime? I mean, we all know they knew each other.
Yeah.
We have photos of them at parties in the 90s. That's not a secret.
Oh.
So why would the DOJ feel the need to scrub a file that just, reconfirms they were acquaintances?
And that is the absolute critical question. The existence of a file, whether it's a contact log, a message, a mention in a deposition, it does not by itself constitute an allegation of trafficking.
Right.
However, the deletion of that file suggests that the mere association is now considered sensitive by the current administration of the Justice Department.
Is it possible it's a security issue? Could that be the justification?
It's entirely possible, and it's a plausible explanation. Any document that references a former president, who is, of course, protected by the Secret Service for life, could contain details that are deemed national security risks.
Like what, a private phone number or something?
Maybe. Or a travel itinerary, or details about security protocols at Mar-a-Lago. In that kind of scenario, the deletion is actually standard operating procedure. They have to protect that information.
But the optics, right. I mean, the optics of it are just terrible.
Yeah.
If you release a batch of files and the only ones that disappear are the ones linking to a former president, it just fuels the theory that the DOJ is managing the narrative, not just releasing the facts.
It inevitably does. It creates a vacuum of information, and conspiracy theories absolutely thrive in a vacuum. If the DOJ had just put out a statement saying, "We are retracting File X due to a security protocol involving Secret Service detail," the story dies right there.
It would have been a non-story.
Exactly. By silently deleting it, they turn what could have been a procedural error into a mystery. It suggests they are editing the history book while we are all trying to read it.
And it's not just one side. I want to be crystal clear about that. We're going to talk about other high-profile names later. But this specific mechanism, this release and delete, it seems to be happening in real time. But let's stay on this database for a moment, because it's not just the big names that are so interesting. It's the weird stuff, the fragments.
The textual fragments are fascinating. They really are, because they give us a glimpse into the internal monologue of the investigation itself.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just looking at the finished product, the final indictment. We're looking at the investigators' rough notes, their summaries, their own confusion.
Yeah, let's get into the weeds here. There's a document in the cache, and I'm not going to read the file ID. It's just a long string of numbers. But the text itself is, well, it's bizarre. It refers to troubling theories and nagging questions.
That phrase alone tells you so much about the state of the investigation when it was written. Troubling theories and nagging questions. That is not legal language.
There's all.
That's the language of a detective who just can't make the pieces fit. They're hitting a wall.
And then it goes on. It says some of these things are, quote, strictly speaking, unsolved. Some just have peripheral mysteries attached to.
Peripheral mysteries.
I can't get over that phrase. It sounds like the title of an old Sherlock Holmes story. But we're talking about a federal sex trafficking investigation. What on earth constitutes a peripheral mystery in that context?
Well, if we try to decode that, peripheral implies that the mystery is on the very edge of the central crime. The central crime is the trafficking itself, recruiting, transporting, and abusing the victims. We know how that works legally.
Sure.
A peripheral mystery suggests they found evidence of other activity that wasn't trafficking, but was still deeply suspicious, maybe illegal, or maybe just inexplicable.
Like what? Give me a hypothetical. What would a peripheral mystery look like in the Epstein universe?
Well, just consider the sheer complexity of his life. He wasn't just a predator. He was this financial conduit. So a peripheral mystery might be, why did a specific intelligence asset from a foreign government visit Epstein's townhouse at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Right. Not trafficking, but something.
Something. Or it might be, where did this specific wire transfer of $10 million originate, and why does the paper trail suddenly vanish in the Virgin Islands? It's not the sex crime itself, but it's part of the infrastructure that's built around it.
And it suggests the investigators just hit walls. They found these threads they couldn't pull.
Or perhaps threads they were told not to pull because they led outside the specific scope of trafficking.
That's the scary part. That phrase, strictly speaking unsolved, it implies they know something happened, they just can't prove who did it or why. It's a formalized admission that there are massive holes in the case.
And this aligns perfectly with everything we know about the case publicly. The prosecution of Maxwell was very narrow. They got her on specific counts. But the broader network, the money, the potential blackmail, those all remain peripheral mysteries. They're like the dark matter of the Epstein universe. We know they're there because we can see the gravitational pull, but we can't actually see them.
And speaking of things we can't see, or maybe things we don't want to see, there's another fragment that delves into the mind. The document references accessing inner psychological issues and forensic issues.
This is a pivot from the criminal to the clinical. When you see a file mention inner psychological issues and then pairs it with something like outstanding research contributions regarding misleading questions, we are entering the realm of forensic psychology.
Misleading questions. Okay, break that down for me. Is this about how the lawyers were treating the victims on the stand?
It's highly likely. In a high-stakes defense, especially in sex crime cases that involve memories from years, even decades ago, the defense strategy often relies on the concept of false memory or implanted memories.
So they argue the investigators coached the victims.
Exactly. They argue that the investigators used misleading questions to get the victims to remember things that didn't actually happen.
So this document might be an internal analysis of their own interrogation techniques.
Yes. It could be an internal DOJ review asking, did we mess this up? Did we ask leading questions that are going to destroy this case when it gets to court? Or, and this is more disturbing, it could be an analysis of how Epstein himself operated.
What do you mean?
Epstein was known to be a master manipulator. He didn't just force victims, he groomed them. He played these elaborate mind games. Accessing inner psychological issues might refer to his methodology, how he identified a vulnerability in a young woman and then systematically exploited it.
It makes him sound like a predator who actually studied his prey. Like this wasn't just lust, it was some kind of psychological experiment for him.
And that framework, the idea of this being a sick experiment, that leads us directly to the single most baffling document in the entire Pinpoint database, the physics anomaly.
I honestly thought this was a mistake when I first saw it in the source material. I thought, okay, the Courier newsroom must have uploaded a file from a totally different story by accident. But no, it's there. A document in the DOJ trafficking file that explicitly references unanswered questions in physics.
It is jarring. You're reading about subpoenas and flight logs and financial records, and then suddenly you're reading about questions that urgently need answering in the realm of theoretical physics.
That gets even weirder. The same text mentions issues of masculine and unanswered questions in physics. You have to put those two things together for me because my brain just refuses to do it.
Okay, to understand this, we have to understand Epstein's self-mythology. He didn't see himself as a common criminal.
No.
In his own mind, he was a visionary. He was obsessed with transhumanism, with genetics, with eugenics. He surrounded himself with famous scientists, Nobel laureates, physicists, evolutionary biologists. He pumped millions and millions of dollars into university science departments.
But why is a document about physics in his criminal trafficking file? What's the connection?
There are two main possibilities. One is that he was using all of these scientific pursuits as a cover, a front.
A way to move money.
Exactly. He was moving money and people under the guise of funding research. So a document about physics might actually be a receipt for a grant that was really a payoff to someone. Money laundering through science.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a plausible criminal explanation.
But the second possibility is much, much darker, and it connects directly to that phrase, issues of masculine. Epstein was obsessed with the idea of spreading his DNA. He had this bizarre plan to seed the human race with his own genetic material at his ranch in New Mexico.
I remember reading about that, the baby ranch.
Yes. So it is possible that this document reflects his twisted worldview, where his masculine imperative to procreate was justified in his mind by some bastardized version of evolutionary physics.
So in his head, he wasn't trafficking women, he was conducting a biological imperative.
That's the theory. It suggests he intellectualized his crimes to an extraordinary degree. He wrapped them in the language of high science to dissociate from the sheer brutality of what he was doing. And the fact that the DOJ has this document means they were looking at this as a possible motive. They were trying to understand the why.
It adds this layer of, I don't even know the word for it. Eccentricity doesn't even begin to cover it. It's madness.
It is.
And it suggests that the questions that remain aren't just legal questions about who did what to whom. They're almost philosophical questions about how a human being can rationalize that level of evil.
It complicates the narrative. It's much easier to hate a simple thug who hurts people for fun. It's far more disturbing to confront a monster who thinks he is solving the unanswered questions of physics while he's destroying lives.
It suggests a level of narcissism that's almost impossible to prosecute, because the defendant is literally living in a totally different reality from the rest of us.
And while he was living that bizarre reality, he was also living in the very real world of high finance. We can't forget the money. There's a file that references 5% of the total issued and outstanding equity.
Follow the money. It's the oldest rule in any investigation, right?
And it's usually where you find the most concrete answers. This fragment is specific. 5% of the total issued and outstanding equity refers to a precise stake in a specific company.
But which company? That's the million-dollar question.
The document doesn't say, or at least the fragment we have access to doesn't say, but the context around it mentions people being afforded the opportunity to ask questions. This sounds like a shareholder meeting or maybe a deposition regarding a complex corporate structure.
What does that imply about his network? I mean, if there is outstanding equity, that means there are other shareholders. That means there are partners.
Exactly. Epstein did not operate in a financial vacuum. He managed money for billionaires. He owned dozens of shell companies. If he held 5% equity in a company, or if another company held 5% equity in one of his operations, those other shareholders are absolutely part of the web.
It really feels like there are silent partners out there, people who didn't necessarily go to the island, but who were happy to sign the checks.
Or people who profited from the enterprise, even indirectly. If that equity was in a company that was used to facilitate the trafficking, say, a modeling agency or a private travel logistics firm, then the other 95% of the equity holders are extremely relevant to the investigation. This is a massive unanswered question. Who else profited? Who else held a stake in the Epstein enterprise, strictly from a business perspective?
So we've got psychological mysteries, we have scientific madness, and we have these financial black holes all buried in these document fragments. And that's just from the pinpoint database. But I want to shift gears a little bit. We've looked at what the government seems to be hiding, or at least deleting. Now I want to look at what was released, what we know happened, and yet what nobody in power seems to want to talk about.
You're referring to the Maxwell files.
Specifically, the 2015 court documents. And I think the date is really important here. 2015. This was 4 years before the final arrest in 2019. It was before he died in jail. This is when he was still, a free man, so to speak, after that first sweetheart deal.
Correct. The 2015 defamation case between Ghislaine Maxwell and Virginia Giuffre was the first real crack in the dam. It was the moment the seal was broken. Before 2015, there were whispers and rumors. After 2015, there were sworn depositions.
And the source material we're looking at here from the news and why it matters, they refer to this as the Epstein Files Alert, which is a bit of a cheeky title, but it absolutely gets to the point.
It does.
Because the names that popped up in these 2015 documents are the heaviest of hitters.
Yeah.
We're not talking about obscure physicists anymore. We're talking about Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz,
Right.
and former President Bill Clinton.
These are the names that have really dominated the public consciousness of this case, and for good reason. The documents place these individuals squarely in the ecosystem. Specifically, the source mentions visits to the private island, Little St. James.
Right. And again, we have to be so careful here, just like we were with Trump. Being on a list doesn't automatically mean you committed a crime, but the island is different, isn't it? But it has a different weight.
The location matters immensely. Meeting Jeffrey Epstein at a charity gala in New York is one thing. Flying on a private jet to a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which we now know was the absolute epicenter of his trafficking operation, that is another thing entirely.
So the questions that remain here revolve around the nature of these visits. We have the logistics, we have the flight logs, the pilot's testimony. We know they were there. The giant variable is what happened behind those closed doors.
What was the purpose of the visit?
And this is where the major disconnect happens. The source makes a really big point about the public reaction versus the mainstream media reaction. They say that when these files drop, Social media goes crazy.
An absolute firestorm.
Twitter melts down. Reddit threads explode with citizen analysis. But then they ask this really pointed question. When is the truth going to come out, and when is the media going to report on this?
And it's a valid critique of our whole information ecosystem. The source is highlighting a massive divide. On one side, you have the citizen investigators on social media who are connecting dots, sharing screenshots, and demanding accountability. They see the names Clinton, Andrew, and to them, it's a smoking gun.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have the legacy mainstream media, and their reaction is muted. It's careful. It's almost hesitant.
But why is that? I mean, seriously, if you have a former U.S. president and his senior British royal named in sworn court documents regarding a sex trafficking island, isn't that the scoop of the century? Why aren't they running wall-to-wall coverage on it?
There are two primary reasons. One is legal, and the other is structural. Legally, the media is terrified of libel laws. In the U.S., and especially in the U.K. with Prince Andrew, libel laws are incredibly fierce. Without a criminal conviction or a definitive confession, reporting that person X participated in sex trafficking carries a massive risk of a lawsuit that could literally bankrupt a media company.
So they're just playing it safe, legally speaking.
They are playing it legally safe, yes. They will report documents were released. They might list the names that are in those documents, but they will not connect the dots in the way the public wants them to. They will not say guilty. They will say named in a deposition. It's a very fine line.
It feels like a cop-out, though. To a lot of people, it feels like a protective bubble is being put around these powerful men.
And that leads directly to the structural reason: access. These are powerful men. They have powerful PR machines and powerful friends. If a network goes too hard on a former president or a royal without absolute ironclad proof, they lose access. They get frozen out.
The reporters don't get their calls returned.
Exactly. So the source argues that this caution amounts to a cover-up, or at the very least, a willful blindness. They're asking why the media isn't condemning these actions with the same fervor they apply to so many other scandals.
It just reinforces that idea of a two-tiered justice system. And maybe a two-tiered media system as well.
It does.
If you're a regular person, your mugshot is on the 6 o'clock news before you're even charged. If you're a prince, the media spends weeks debating the nuance of the word visit.
And this is what fuels the frustration you see in the source material. They explicitly contrast that social media storm with the lack of mainstream reporting. It creates a sense that the real story is being actively suppressed and that the only place to find the truth is in the raw data dumps that people are analyzing themselves online.
You know, the source material actually brings up a really interesting, if unexpected, comparison to illustrate this polarization. They talk about the hate crime questions looming after the Colorado Springs shooting. Now, obviously, that is a totally separate, tragic event, different context. But why do they link that to Epstein?
They use it as a case study in how the media frames unanswered questions. In the Colorado Springs case, the media immediately jumped to a political framing. Was it a hate crime? Was it driven by right-wing rhetoric? They filled in the unanswered questions with political theory almost instantly.
And with Epstein?
With Epstein, the source argues, the media avoids that political framing when it becomes inconvenient for certain powerful figures. Or, conversely, the public fills the gap with their own politics. Republicans look at the flight logs and see Bill Clinton. Democrats look at the deleted files and see Donald Trump.
So the truth becomes a casualty of the political lens we're all looking through. We aren't looking for justice anymore. We're looking for ammunition to use against the other team.
Precisely. And this makes any kind of ongoing investigation incredibly difficult because half the country thinks the other half is complicit in a cover-up. It just muddies the waters. And in muddy waters, it is very, very easy for the big fish to swim away unseen.
Which brings us right back to the idea of things being hidden. We talked about the deletions. We talked about the media silence. But there is a literal numerical gap in the data that we need to address. The slow drip, as it's been called.
This is the final structural mystery, and it's a big one. The pinpoint database that we discussed at the start, it holds data sets 1 through 8, and it also holds data set 12.
Okay, I'm not a mathematician, but I know how counting works. Where are data sets 9, 10, and 11?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's like reading a murder mystery and finding out the middle 3 chapters have been ripped out. You have the setup and you have the conclusion, but the part where the crime actually happens is just gone.
And if we accept the premise that the DOJ is willing to delete individual files from the sets they've already released, as the source claims, then The total absence of 3 entire data sets is highly, highly suspicious.
What could be in there? I mean, structurally, how are these things usually organized? Is it chronological? Is it alphabetical by name?
It could be chronological. If that's the case, then sets 9 through 11 might cover a very specific and important time period, perhaps the most active years of the trafficking ring. Or it could be organized by subject matter. Maybe set 9 is financials, maybe set 10 is foreign connections.
Or maybe set 11 is the tapes.
Pause. We just don't know. But the fact that they are missing builds on this theme of future releases expected. We are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The authorities release a little bit of information, they gauge the public and media reaction, and then they hold back the rest.
It feels like a strategy, a containment strategy. Keep the story from ever fully exploding.
And we really must clarify for the listener because this can get confusing. We're talking about 2 completely different piles of documents here. The source is very careful to distinguish between the Epstein estate files and these U.S. Justice Department files.
Right. The estate files are from the executors of his will, correct?
Yeah.
The people who are trying to clean up his financial mess and pay off the victims' lawsuits.
Yes. The estate files are a trove of roughly 20,000 documents. These would contain the personal, unvarnished records, the infamous Black Book, the raw financial data, the household management logs for the islands and homes.
And the DOJ files.
The DOJ files are the official investigative product. The surveillance reports, the witness interviews, the forensic analysis of computers and phones.
So we have the criminal's private diary, and we have the cop's official notebook.
It's a great way to put it. And the problem is, both of them have missing pages. The estate has a vested interest in privacy. They want to settle the lawsuits quietly and close the books. The Justice Department is supposed to have a vested interest in transparency.
Supposed to.
But when they start deleting files, or when entire data sets go missing, it suggests that their primary interest has shifted from justice to management, damage control.
It really makes you wonder if this case is actually closed in their eyes. I mean, the official line from the government is, Epstein is dead, Maxwell is in prison, mission accomplished. But if you're still deleting files in real time, that suggests the case is still radioactive.
You don't scrub a cold case file, you just archive it. You only actively scrub a file that still has the potential to cause damage today. The active management of this database, the release and the retraction, it indicates that there are live wires in there. There are people mentioned in those files who are still powerful, still active in public life, and perhaps still vulnerable to what's in them.
So let's try to zoom out here. We've been deep in the weeds of file IDs and physics papers and missing data sets. But what does this all mean for us? For the public, for the victims, for everyone trying to understand what actually happened?
I think we can establish a kind of taxonomy of the unknown. We can categorize all of these questions that remain into 4 distinct buckets.
Okay, walk me through them. What's bucket number 1?
Bucket 1 is unanswered mysteries. These are the peripheral mysteries that are mentioned right there in the DOJ's own files. The strange side stories, the intelligence connections that don't fit the neat pattern of sex trafficking, the specific why of that bizarre physics obsession. These are the things that investigators looked at, scratched their heads over, and then officially labeled unsolved.
Okay, unsolved. What's bucket number 2?
Ongoing investigations. And I don't mean new police investigations into more criminals. I mean the investigation into the official record itself. The active deletion of files by the DOJ suggests that the government is still actively managing the fallout from this case. The case is not static history. It is fluid. The story is being edited as we speak.
And bucket number 3.
Future releases. This is the big one. The missing data sets 9, 10, and 11. We know they exist. The numbering sequence itself implies they exist. The anticipation of what's in these missing blocks of data keeps the story alive. It means we cannot write the final chapter of this saga because we are literally missing the middle pages.
And the final bucket, the 4th one.
Questions that may never be answered, and this is the hardest one for people to accept. The inner psychological issues, what was truly going on in Epstein's head, and most importantly, the full extent of the pals' involvement. We have the names, Clinton, Trump, Andrew, Dershowitz. Documentation places them at the scene of the crimes. But the legal consequences, the definitive proof of what happened behind those closed doors on that island, that may have died in a jail cell with Jeffrey Epstein.
That is a very sobering thought.
Yeah.
That despite terabytes of data, despite all these databases and court dumps and flight logs, the core truth of who did what might just be gone forever.
Or it's sitting there waiting in dataset 9.
I hope so. But it just feels like every answer we get just breeds 3 more questions. It's like a hydra. You cut off one head and 3 more grow back in its place.
And that is the nature of a conspiracy that involves this level of power and wealth. The complexity itself is the camouflage. They hide the truth in a mountain of paper, and then they try to remove the most important sheets when they think no one is looking.
Well, thanks to sources like the Pinpoint database and the work of the Courier newsroom, at least we know where to look, even if we can't see everything just yet.
Vigilance is really the only tool we have left.
We've established that the Department of Justice has deleted files connecting Epstein to high-profile figures. We've established that documents regarding unsolved and peripheral mysteries exist within the official record, and we've confirmed that significant data sets are still missing. Next time, the final episode. The legacy. What society learned. Prevention. Supporting survivors. Our final assessment. That's next time on the Epstein Files.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.